Then let's turn now to Marco Vicenzino, who joins us on this special program from London. Now, he's a geopolitics expert and strategy advisor to decision makers worldwide, both in the public and private sector. Marco, thank you very much for joining us today. I'd like to start by seeing if you could react to what our international affairs editor, Ketevan Gorgistani, just said. What do you make of these Western reactions?
Listen, it's been 50 years. After 50 years, the regime finally falls. 13 years of civil war and an offensive in 12 days the Assad regime falls. It caught many off guard, particularly in the international community. Ideally, the situation would be is that together there would be a new national compact. The various forces that have often clashed with each other in the opposition could come together. That's an ideal situation. But the real worry is that there'll be fragmentation of the country, and that'll lead to spillover within the region and beyond. And you can draw parallels to Libya, what happened when the downfall of Gaddafi in 2011. So the international community has to be very careful. They're not driving events on the ground. The events on the ground are being driven by Syrians themselves, particularly the opposition forces. Remember, there's many of them. HPS led the offensive, but there are the others that control different parts of the country. So the international community, I'm saying, is being very cautious in its rhetoric, because also at the head of that most powerful force of the HTS is Mr. Jalani. Mr. Jalani is head of HTS, is recognized as a terrorist force internationally. He himself has a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. government that goes back years ago. So it's a very, very difficult situation and a very complex one to deal with at the present time.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much. We're gonna cross now to Ankara to talk to our correspondent Jasper Morterer, also to get a better idea of how other international powers are reacting to these developments. Now, the Syrian war, of course, really did morph into a proxy battlefield of sorts for both regional and international powers. The United States, Iran, Russia, Turkey, all kind of either cooperating or competing for their different interests. On Turkey then, Jasper, how do you think Ankara's conflict with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces will affect its role in this transitional process?
That's an interesting question. Turkey's opposition to the SDF is fundamental. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said earlier today that the SDF was an extension of the PKK, the Turkish Kurdish insurgent group, and that it was run by non-Syrians. He went as far as that. And Turkey would have no dealings with it unless, and he raised his finger at this point, the SDF changed themselves. Now, Turkey is all alone on this point. America backs the SDF, and various possibilities could transpire. Turkey may try to influence the Syrian transitional process by boycotting the SDF and working through its good working relations with HTS and the Syrian National Army, the two rebel groups that it has been working with in the province of Idlib for the last 6 years. Alternatively, the SDF may try to make adjustments, get rid of the foreign elements, distance itself from the PKK to satisfy Ankara. That may be unlikely. We'll have to see.
Now, what do you think then Turkey really wants to come out of this revolution from its perspective, from a Turkish perspective? What are the main interests and priorities?
Turkey has two interests. Firstly, it wants to see a peaceful, democratic Syria, so that the 3.7 million Syrian refugees on Turkish soil will feel it's safe to return home. Those refugees have become a political liability to the government. The opposition parties are calling for them to go home. So immediately, Turkey wants to see order in Syria. No lawlessness, no fighting among the various armed groups, because otherwise the refugees won't want to return home. Secondly, Turkey doesn't want the Kurds to profit from this revolution. That means it doesn't want the PKK to feel free to operate in northern Syria and strike into southern Turkey whenever it wants. Nor does Turkey want the Kurds, who run their own affairs in the northeast of Syria at the moment, around the town of Hasakia. He doesn't want them to receive Damascus's blessing in the new constitutional arrangements to set up a Kurdish autonomous zone as the Kurds in Iraq have. You know, Turkey fears that if the Syrian Kurds gain autonomy and the Iraqi Kurds already have autonomy, then the 14 million Turkish Kurds will demand autonomy as well.
Jasper Mortimer, thank you very much. I want to piggyback off of one of the things you said there and bring back Marco Vicenzino, who, again, is a geopolitics expert in London for us. Marco, we heard Jasper say that Turkey wants a peaceful, democratic Syria. It wants order in Syria. Turkey obviously is not the only global power that wants to see that. What we've heard thus far from the rebels, I think, is certainly reassuring in a sense. You mentioned Libya earlier. We saw these rebels, contrary to what happened in Libya, peacefully escort the prime minister out of his office into a hotel. We've seen them say that they're going to protect religious minorities, that they're going to put an end to sectarianism, to tyranny that we saw under Bashar al-Assad. How realistic is it? How likely is it that this group will respect those promises?
There's word and there's actions. The words, they're saying everything that everyone wants to hear. Their actions will be seen over a series of time. For many is that once one is a radical, one will always be a radical. That's a portion, a segment of analysts will say that. In the reality, with the West, the outside players have no other choice but to give them internally a chance. They can't control the events on the ground. The events on the ground, like I said, are being run by Syrians themselves. So it's going to be a step-by-step process. What happened on October 7th of 2023 unleashed a series of events, interconnected. It led to the decimation of Gaza. It led to the decimation of Hamas as a fighting force. It led to basically Hezbollah weakened seriously, and that triggered the fall of this regime. And then furthermore, you have Russia, then Iran are humiliated. Iran loses its land bridge, going from the Persian Gulf, extending to the Mediterranean, going through Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon was the connection between the two. Now it's lost that. All it retains is its proxies in Iraq, and then in Yemen, the Houthis, which are still wreaking havoc on international commerce within the Red Sea. Russia, on the other hand, is in a predicament. It has its only naval base in the Mediterranean coast of Syria and also an important air base. Will they be able to negotiate with the current forces to retain that remains a big question. At the same time, Turkey comes out very strong, heavy influence. They want, once again, it's those issues of stability in Syria, and then also the Kurdish militants and the refugees. As stated, it's become an internal liability. Israel remains the strongest fighting force in the region. Jordan on its southern border right now, it's closing all its borders, and the U.S. has a new incoming administration. And where things lie between now and January 20th, when the new president assumes power, President-elect Trump, between now and then, many things can happen.
Marco, I just wanted to, it's Ketaman Gorgesani. I wanted to ask you, you touched upon it a little bit, but what type of role can other countries, not necessarily Turkey, obviously, but other countries in the region play in the next few weeks, next few months, when we're talking about what sort of governing body you can have in Syria? And then even more so, what role can the West play, and should the West play any role in the future?
Like I said, first it talks about the security situation first and foremost, that there is no internal fragmentation. The outside powers have a vested interest, I think, in that happening in order to prevent spillover, which will affect them. And then if there is a level of basic stability over time, and then there is these confidence building measures step by step, and then from there you begin a reconstruction process, which many have to participate in. I think most countries in the region have a vested interest in Syrian stabilization. And then when it comes to the reconstruction process, that'll involve many economic powers. You're talking powers from the Gulf countries, primarily Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, the European Union. Obviously, they don't want spillover and another wave of refugees coming in from Turkey into the European Union. And the U.S., with a new administration, has a vested interest of not giving more American resources around the world. Remember, you have the conflict, the Middle East, not only the Middle East, but there's also the Ukraine war that continues. A new administration wants the least amount of conflicts to be able to focus on its own domestic issues. And then also there's the issue of China. The U.S. wants to get many of its resources, have a more stable Middle East, and to be able to focus more on the situation with China in the Indo-Pacific. So there are many. This is not just one conflict. It's not just about Syria alone. It's a series of interconnected links that in the region and beyond the region that go global, that basically we're living in a very fragmented, dangerous world. The more you can reduce these conflicts, the more they can stabilize things internationally, not just politically, but also economically. What's at stake in the Middle East will inevitably impact the world.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much. I'd like to turn back to Jasper Mortimer in Ankara. Jasper, you spoke earlier about how Turkey wants to make sure that this isn't a victory for the Kurdish minority. What kind of relationship do Kurdish groups have to the HTS rebel group?
I don't know of any relations. However, Turkey has been basically safeguarding the northwestern province of Idlib, the sort of enclave in which the opposition to Bashar al-Assad has been holed up for the last 10 years. And the two major armed elements in Idlib have been the HTS and the Syrian National Army. Now, the Syrian National Army is trained, financed, equipped by Turkey, no question. Turkey's relationship with the HDS is a little unclear, but I think it's difficult to believe that the HDS got its weapons without getting the green light for those weapons to pass to it from Ankara. So there is a relationship between Ankara and the HDS. I don't know of a relationship between the Kurds of Turkey and the HDF. I think the HDF is a 100% Arab unit.
Jasper Mortimer, thank you very much. We're going to turn back now to Ketavan Gordestani. Ketavan, you were our Washington correspondent for quite some time. The U.S. is about to see a transition of power of its own. President-elect Donald Trump, we heard from our guest earlier some of the comments that he's made about the fall of Bashar al-Assad, saying that the U.S. has no real business militarily in Syria. What does this mean? What will an increasingly absent United States from what's happening in Syria mean for the rest of the conflict?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what Donald Trump will do. Yes, he has repeated it, and he basically used the same words in his post from last night and then again this morning, this idea that this is not our fight. We should not get involved. The U.S. should stay as far away as possible from this. And this is more broadly what he has been saying basically about any conflict in the world, this idea of America first, and we're going to deal with our issues, and we're going to let everybody else deal with their own problems. And so it is likely that he's not going to get involved. But the fact is that there is still in Syria some sort of U.S. presence. It's very much in the West. It's very small, but there are U.S. interests there. And so they can't completely sort of pretend that nothing's happening, especially if things don't go towards the sort of ideal path that everybody is hoping that this country will go in, and that there is chaos and there are problems, and that there is a fragmentation of these groups and maybe some more instability. In that case, the U.S. might have to, in a way, make a decision in as far as, do we simply completely get out of there, or do we need to have some sort of reaction? Because the one thing that Donald Trump has always said, even though he is very much against getting into wars, is that he will protect, like other administrations before him, the interests of the United States, whether they are physical interests or personnel interests. So if something happens with these troops that are in Syria, then you could see something change. But we will have to see exactly where Donald Trump goes. And I think that between now and the inauguration, when he actually becomes the incumbent president, a lot of things can happen. And we might have also, we and the United States and the world might have a better understanding of where things are going in Syria, and might be able to make a more educated decision on what to do next and how much to get involved. One thing to remember also when we're talking about these rebel groups, especially HTS and some of the other ones that have a big ideological antagonism to the United States, any sign of sort of U.S. backing would not be great for them either. And so I think any involvement from the United States would have to be done very carefully also for that reason, not just because they don't want to get involved.
I want to talk to you again, Marco Vicenzino, about some of what Ketevan said about Donald Trump's isolationism, because it really represents a pretty seismic ideological shift of the Republican Party, not only the Republican Party, but also the Biden administration. Why do you think, how do you explain this shift, really? Why is it that American voters are so much more attached nowadays to getting out of all of these crises in the Middle East?
Listen, I wouldn't use the term isolationism. I use greater self-interest. The school of realpolitik. It's about your national self-interest and how to promote it more, as opposed to wide, broad multilateralism. The sense of what you refer to as isolationism and what I call more greater national self-interest is something that goes throughout American history. From the birth of when the American independence began in 1776, up until the late 19th century, until the Spanish-American War, you had a 100 and somewhat 25-year period where America really, for the most part, disengaged from many foreign conflicts, disengaged from foreign entanglements, as George Washington said in his farewell address. Avoid the conflicts of Europe and let us focus on our own hemisphere. And then in the Spanish-American War of 1898, you begin a process where America begins to expand the world, around the world. The Spanish Empire falls, the U.S. takes Puerto Rico, it takes Cuba at the time, it takes Guam, the Philippines, and it introduces America into a wider world. But that doesn't mean that it becomes a power. So even throughout the end of the First World War, you have a new era of what you called isolationism set in the 1920s up until the Second World War. America only really becomes a global power starting from 1945 until today. And what you see happening within the Republican Party, an element is going back to its past, back to the 19th century, back to the pre-World War II period of greater national self-interest. We're living in a world today of you call greater global competition amongst major powers. And Trump doesn't see the world so much as a full Western alliance. He sees America a lot as America on its own, with select allies operating with them, but also, first and foremost, it's America, and it's working bilaterally with different countries around the world. It's a different approach, but it's not a new one. It goes back in American history.
Marco Vicenzino, geopolitical expert in London. Thank you so much. Thank you also to Jasper Mortimer, who is in Ankara. We're going to turn now and talk about the situation on the ground in Syria. We've spoken quite a bit about how foreign powers are reacting to the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. That celebratory mood, though, goes far beyond foreign powers, far beyond the rebel groups that spearheaded the advance. To the sound of occasional gunfire, chants, and prayers, crowds in Syria have been gathering, specifically in Damascus, to celebrate the fall of Bashar al-Assad. That offers, at least for now, a sense of unity and hope for the future for Syrians. Emily Boyle has more on that.
With the push, this statue of Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, topples to the ground. In Kamshili, an autonomous province of Syrian Kurdistan in northeast Syria, locals have been celebrating the fall of the Assad regime since the early hours of the morning.
I can't put my feelings into words. We have been waiting for this day for 14 years. The fall of Bashar al-Assad signifies the dawn of a new Syria for us, a life filled with hope, justice, humanity, dignity and freedom.
In Damascus, residents were also hopeful for their futures as the jubilant crowds filled the Umayyad Square in Damas Old Town. The Syrian capital came under control of the Islamist rebels on Sunday morning. The mood was much the same in Homs, where people danced in the streets, celebrating what they see as a victory for the Syrian people.
14 years ago, I was displaced from Homs when the regime forced us to leave the city by bus. We returned to Homs as victors and liberators.
The fall of the regime was also celebrated in Azaz in northwest Syria on the border with Turkey, a region which has been living on Turkish aid for many years. Wearing flags on their backs, locals filled the streets in their thousands to celebrate the end of Assad's rule.
One other anecdotal reaction to what is happening in Syria is that there are increasing reports of Syrian refugees in some of the neighboring countries that are, flocking to the borders in the hopes of possibly being able to return to their country, which in itself is a major move. If it gets more than just anecdotal reporting, that could be also a sign of people's cautious optimism about what the future holds for Syria.
And we indeed did hear HTS saying earlier today, indeed, that they would welcome with open arms Syrian displaced all over the world. So indeed, again, an optimistic message. I want to go back to you, sir, Marco Vicenzino. What do you make of that optimism on the part of Syrians?
It depends on people who are being displaced. It's those who left because of opposition to the Assad regime. They've gone to places. I mean, Turkey has the bulk of them, well over 3 million. You have several million around Europe. You have Lebanon alone, a population of 3 to 4 million before the conflict in Syria. Now they've brought in well over 1 million, probably even more refugees. So there's the issue of within Syria, how do you absorb them from coming in when you have an entire infrastructure that's been destroyed? So there's the issue of absorption capacity. So yes, everyone wants to go home, but go home to what? If their homes have been destroyed, if their villages have been destroyed, they have nothing to go back to, and what are you going to host them with? So absorption capacity, lack of infrastructure, and then many people, after 10 years, many have already settled into these new societies, particularly in places like Europe. If you go to Germany, some have integrated, some have not. So you have that issue that when your children are growing up in a certain society outside of there, what are you going to go home to as opposed to what you have now? So there's many issues at play here.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much. Well.